Hello, everybody. Welcome back to
Good afternoon.
Meeting number 2. So we don't quite have everybody here, but we know that people will trickle in. But it is 2 o'clock by my watch, so I want to get started because we have a lot to cover. Housekeeping rules, just heads up, reminders that we ask that your camera is on the entire time. Unless you have to step away for some reason, please turn the camera off. Mute unless you are speaking. And we will take a break about halfway through so you can answer emails, phone calls, or whatever you may need to do. But please dedicate this time to the code hearing process and try not to multitask. we all get good at that now on Zoom. So we ask that you be present as if you're in a meeting with all of us together. Just for anybody in the general public that hasn't been a part of this, we'll go over quickly the way things work. The Roberts Rules of Order is what we follow. Those rules, just high level, are the proposal will be introduced by myself, the moderator, and then the proponent will speak, give us a little 5-minute overview or less of their proposal. Then the general public will be able to speak in support or opposition of that proposal. From there, we will ask, looks like Carol's unable to, okay, that's fine. We'll ask the committee to ask any questions they have about the proposal. Then it'll go back to the community, the general public, to do any rebuttals in support or opposition. Then back to the committee for any conversation they might have. So for those of you that weren't familiar with that, that's how we are going to abide by the code hearing today, and that's what we have so far. So all those that can see the screen with the agenda on it, please raise your hand virtually. This is how we're going to vote. So I want to make sure everybody's able to do that and there aren't any problems. Okay, great. We still look like we got a few people that haven't voted yet. Go ahead and raise your hand virtually if you can. Keep your hands up while we do that. And in the meantime, I don't see, Courtney, I don't see Sean on yet. Maybe, okay, he is on.
He's in the attendees.
We have to promote him over. And in the meantime, Sean, we are going to allow you to come over because I believe you have a quick 10, maybe 15 at the max presentation to give to the committee. So I'll stop sharing my screen, Sean. If you want to share the screen, feel free to go right ahead.
All right, let me go ahead and share. One moment. All right, so can you see my screen all right and hear me okay?
We can.
Yes, we can. Kevin, real quick before Sean starts, would you please promote Jeff Crow, a committee member, over to the panelist side? Thank you so much.
And then the other question is, which screen are you seeing? Are you seeing just the presentation or my my presentation with?
Yeah, you're good. Just the presentation showing.
All right, great. So before we get started, we wanted to provide the committee with some information that NBI has been working with NORESCO to generate to help you guide your decisions. So what you see here is something probably very similar to something that you've seen before, a code progress chart. So this is very similar if you've seen something like this before, but it is also a little bit different. And we want to talk about that because it's been customized for Denver specific uses. The first thing is that as we are looking at the progress of the codes and how Denver's code relates to those, instead of being based on energy or ZEP-B, EP, EUI, kind of the traditional ways that this has usually been presented, this is actually based on carbon use intensity. And so if we look at this, we're not just looking at the carbon intensity of the building, but we're also accounting for time. So a building built under this code vintage, what would be the 20-year carbon intensity for that building? So we kind of capture the life cycle of a piece of equipment. So this takes into account Excel's decarbonizing grid. Over time, electricity will be more carbon intensive. One reason for doing this is that when you look at the proposals that are in front of you, you have efficiency proposals, you have electrification proposals, you have renewable energy proposals. And this allows us to look at the impact of all of them on a single chart. And I just want to talk briefly about how we did the calculations behind this. Won't get too deep in the weeds. If you want to get in the weeds, feel free to reach out to me. But this is based on estimates of the impacts of the proposals. Energy use is converted to carbon over those 20 years. So the efficiency improvements of proposals basically just reduces the energy, reduces the carbon. Electrification proposals switch energy use from gas to electricity, and we see the carbon impact of that over time. And then the carbon value of a renewable energy system, if it's being required, is then just subtracted from the total carbon of the building so that we can see the impact of that. The overall calculation does account for the fact that some proposals will have different impacts on different building types. So maybe multifamily is excluded, maybe this is a system type that's only in retail, that sort of thing. We can account for those differences. And then those weighted averages are based on data for Denver that has been drawn from a couple of different sources. And since all of this is based on educated estimates, the best that we can do, but we're not actually doing a big parametric modeling of all the proposals, we've accounted for interactive effects just by basically derating the cumulative impact of the proposals by 10%. And that's actually a variable that we can change if we find that something else is more appropriate. And like I said, if you want more detail, feel free to ask me. I'm happy to meet with people about this. So one of the things that you will notice here is that we have this dot on 2030. And so this includes the ultimate goal for Denver's net zero energy new buildings and homes implementation plan, which is that in 2030, we will begin to have homes and commercial buildings that actually achieve zero net energy. But we are talking about the energy code, which right now is still primarily focused on design. And since there is a fairly well-recognized gap between our designs and our actual performance, we have the goal for the design, so for the code building, is 2027 to get to net zero. And so that's why our line goes to 2027 instead of 2030, which is the ultimate goal for the plan overall. To address this issue, the city is adopting a series of policies starting in 2024 to bring actual outcomes and building designs into closer alignment with each other. And I do want to highlight that always keep in mind that this is about code vintage, not necessarily the buildings built in this year. So we will have, it's very possible that we will have buildings built to the 2022 code still being constructed in 2027 just because of the long, approval and construction process that we see in some projects. So for this committee's use, one of the things that we have done is we have plotted out 2 points for 2022. One is the current status, and that is right now the 3 proposals that you have adopted so far and where 2022 lands on this chart based on that current status. That second lower dot is the max potential of all of the proposals that have been submitted so far. And so you can see that we have the proposals to get on the line if they are all approved, and we will be able to see the impacts as we move forward. And I did want to bring back, this is based on our best estimates of the impact of these proposals. We have a similar chart for residential, which is going to be our primary discussion today. And you can see that even though the line isn't as steep, that because the national model codes have not made the same kind of progress that the commercial codes have made, that Denver has more ground to make up between the model code and the goal. And if you look at it right now, where we stand on a carbon basis, even if all of the proposals are adopted, we don't actually have enough carbon savings to get on the line unless modifications are made to the existing proposals to increase efficiency, increase electrification, or increase the amount of renewable energy that is required of buildings. So I think this is a very important just kind of milestone for you to keep in mind. This is all based on a tool that NBI has created and is continuing to refine. What this tool allows us to do is essentially turn on and off each of the proposals in order to be able to see the impact. And so you can kind of see I've turned on 3 of them here. Text might be a little bit small, and that will move that current status dot up and down. We're still running some calculations for this percent GHG impact that's measure by measure. There's just a little bit more calculation to do. But one of the things that we also wanted to highlight is the lesson that we learned from this tool is that the majority of the carbon intensity savings actually come from 5 proposals. And so you can see if I turn those 5 proposals on, the current status dot gets very close to the max potential dot. And those 5 proposals, the first 2 are efficiency proposals. One is to calibrate the prescriptive path through through a calibration of section C406 to Denver's goals. The other one is to calibrate the modeling path through calibrating Appendix G to Denver's performance goals. 2 of them are for our electrification requirements to electrify space heating or to electrify water heating. And then 1 of them is for minimum renewable energy. And the story is the same in residential. Nearly all of the savings that we can quantify and on a carbon basis are due to those same 5, except for, they're a little bit different here for residential. But this doesn't mean that the other proposals aren't important. This methodology doesn't allow us to quantify the impacts of all proposals. For example, demand responsive controls is not something that we can quantify the carbon impact on this because it's just too complex. And then there are other proposals that are going through that may not impact the carbon intensity of buildings, but may be improving buildings in other ways, either through making the code clearer, making it more usable, making it more enforceable. So even though these are kind of the big 5 for moving that dot, it doesn't mean that they're the only important ones. And I think I made it in under 10. If you have any questions, I am happy to answer them.
Thanks, Sean. That was great. We'll open it up for questions. Chuck, your hand's up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for that presentation. I guess my question would be, of course, we care about the cost effectiveness of these measures also, and are you ranking them in terms of cost effectiveness, cost per amount of carbon emissions saved?
So no, this tool doesn't do a kind of analysis like that.
Okay, any other quick questions for Sean on how we are to look at proposals today? So Elizabeth, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick question. It's really interesting that the majority of those savings are 4 of the proposals. Is there a way to, just within the list of all the amendments and things like that, is there a way to isolate those so that we can just make sure we're studying those in more depth?
So we can provide the proposal number and title for those 5 residential and 5 commercial so that you can take a closer look at those.
That'd be great. Thank you.
And we'll have this tool, available. We'll be able to use it during all of your hearings. So, we can always put it up. And if you want to see what happens if we pass this one, what happens if we don't. And we even do have the ability to change some of the parameters for the proposals in the background. So if you say, what happens if on in C506, we require this number of credits instead of this number of credits. What is the impact on the calculation? And we're able to do some of that sort of thing. Or what happens if we exclude a certain building type? What happens to the dot moving up or down? So we do have some ability to make some on the fly changes to the calculations.
Great, thank you.
Next up is Nathan.
John, maybe a little in the weeds here, but I was just looking or remember looking at that chart, and you're saying
Nathan, can't quite hear you there.
oh, how about now?
That's better.
Sean, do you mind going back to one of those charts? I just had a question about the value. So it's CO2 per square foot, and then you're saying at 20 years projected operational emissions.
Mhm.
Would you be willing to share, what CO2 values you're looking at and what we're looking at, now versus 20 years? Because that if Excel executes on what they're planning to execute on, that's a big opportunity. And I would be curious to see, is that reduction in carbon from Excel or from increased building efficiency?
We can share the carbon conversion factors for the Excel grid based on their goals. Some of it comes from efficiency, some of it comes from decarbonization, some of it comes from electrification. I can highlight one way to show this is if you look at this slide where you see the dot for IECC and the dot for Denver Energy Code 2022 current status. What you've adopted so far makes only a very small change to the carbon intensity, but you can see that already that dot is lower, and that's just because of the decarbonization that has already occurred on Excel's grid. So, without changing requirements, we do see that the dot moves, but the grid decarbonization doesn't get us all the way there. Not even close. You can kind of see the trend line there.
Okay, thanks for that. I would love to see those values, at some point. Thanks.
Okay, seeing no other hands raised. Sean, thank you for that quick presentation. I appreciate that, and I'm sure the rest of the committee members do as well. With that being said, we will continue on. Before we do that, Erica is our note taker today. Erica, if you want to do a quick roll call of anybody that we're missing to see if they might be listening in but not able to join, that would be great.
Yep, thanks, Kevin. So just a couple people to check if I missed them. First off, excuse me, Aaron Esslink. Okay, Chris Parr. Chris Splike. John Burns. Adam Lyons. Okay. Great. Well, so for today, we have 24 voting members in attendance, and I'd just like to note for the record that Stephen Sanderson is non-voting, and Curtis Underwood is non-voting for just this hearing. So 24 in total.
Great. So we'll come back to you when we get to voting time to see if anybody changed in terms of leaving or coming. Thank you. And then one last thing, that we do have our subject matter expert, Robbie Schwartz, joining us today. So if anybody has any questions with proposals, he's here to answer those as a subject matter expert, although he is bringing quite a few proposals to the table. So just know that we do have a subject matter expert on the line. With that being said, let's get started. We have we are talking about the IECC Denver Green Code Energy Committee hearing. So if you're not here for that, you're welcome to join. And today's hearing is going to be all residential items. So if you are not here or not interested in residential from the general public, we are going to be continuing on the commercial items on the next hearing, which I believe is the 24th. So just know that today we are discussing residential. I do see one hand up before we get started. Elizabeth, go ahead.
Yeah, hey, I have what may be a stupid question, but since I was wondering, maybe other people are wondering too. I want to make sure that I should also be considering the current Denver Building Code and the amendments under the 2019 code as we consider this and I wanted to specifically confirm that how Denver changed the definition of residential is consistent for the discussions today. In that, you know,
Sure.
the 2019 code moved, you redefined residential. And maybe it's worth starting with that.
Eric or Christy, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to be clear, in 2019, and as we consider the conversation and proposals today, residential building from the energy code perspective in Denver is only those buildings, essentially designed under the IRC, single family, duplex, and IRC townhomes. Those are residential buildings. All apartment buildings are considered commercial buildings for the purpose of energy code compliance in Denver.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's very, very good for everybody to know moving forward on this. One more question before we get started. Looks like Nathan.
Yeah, apologies that just in reviewing the proposals, there are some that are specifically related to multifamily buildings under the residential aspect. Will we be getting, will a updated definition be included? It would just be nice to have that written down.
I would just jump in and mention that some discussion will be necessary within the proposals based on some of the language that was used. For example, the term R2, which is an IBC term, is used in one of the proposals, which really wouldn't apply to any residential energy code provisions. So we can talk through those as we get through them. Christy, go ahead.
I was just going to add that the definition was included in the 2019 amendments and it's not changing. So we didn't say that explicitly here, but that is the definition that we're using. And I also just wanted to ask quickly, Eric, I thought we were going to talk for 5 minutes about the big 5 proposals and just suggest that everybody look at them before the next meeting. But if we weren't going to do that, then sorry if I'm out of step.
I think we are working on making sure all 5 are available. We can go ahead and mention them, but we are still working on getting them up on the website in their final form. But yes, and in terms of the commercial and residential, we could either mention them or it may be helpful just to send an email out to all committee members. I'm okay either way in the interest of time.
Okay, then maybe I'll just take 20 seconds to say that we would love when we do communicate about that, we would love for everybody to look at them beforehand because they're a little bit lengthy and they're a little bit complex. And we're going to have probably multiple conversations around them. But because they have such substantial impact towards meeting Denver's community goals or not, and because they're complex, we would encourage everybody to really look at them pretty diligently and not in the 20 minutes before the meeting, but really diligently because you might want to talk about it with other people that you know before we actually talk about them.
Agreed. That's great. Mark, you have a question?
Yeah, I would just like to point out the residential definition, I think, is rather important because there are structures that are built to do residential code but fall under commercial rules. I'd like a determination on those because some of these proposals will affect those structures.
Yep, that's a great point, Mark. And so if the IBC by reference allows design under the IRC, which is the case, and I think you had maybe posted a comment there in the chat, then as an R3 would generally be a single family dwelling, or perhaps a duplex in the IBC, not a very common scenario. But with the reference or the exception to provide design in accordance with the IRC, then the residential provisions would apply there.
Okay. So that is all good background info, and I'm glad you all have been following the past few years on the definitions. That's great. Otherwise, this would make things a little bit different outcomes. So with that, we'll turn it over to the first item of business. Can you all see the agenda on my screen? Am I sharing the correct screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. So Robbie, the first proposal is yours. If you want, I'm going to pull it up. If you want to unmute and give us a quick overview of this proposal.
Yes, thank you, Robbie Schwartz. I am presenting proposals, some of which I submitted myself, some of which are on behalf of NORESCO and the city of Denver, and some of which we worked with people who from the public who put proposals forward to make them acceptable and able to move forward. So this proposal is with regards to third-party inspection agencies. As we move forward to a more performance-based code, we'll be using more and more third-party inspection agencies to contribute to the code compliance of the houses. What we need when we do that is to have a clear understanding of the relationship between the authority having jurisdiction, in this case, Denver, and approved third parties. So this proposal does three things. First, it gives some authority to the third party to allow that third party to inspect and, more importantly, to fail an inspection and ensure that that house moves forward with the intent of the code that's been adopted and can go in and re-inspect that for that particular feature there. Second of all, it requires, in essence, that the authority having jurisdiction, in this case, Denver, determine what the third party is going to be asked to inspect and not inspect. So from the code compliance perspective, sometimes you get a third party and a true city inspector out there, and they're both looking at insulation, for example, or they're both looking at air barrier detail requirements in the code. And that happens for different reasons, but if the city is actually approving and utilizing a third party, it's really important to be clear what the third party's asked to do. Are they just looking at insulation and air barrier details, or are they also looking at HVAC installation details that are also governed by the code? And to be clear, right now, often HVAC issues are still held by the city or the authority having jurisdiction, whereas insulation details might be held or given to that third party. Also, in this realm, when you're utilizing a third party, most often it's an energy rater, and energy raters are trained to create a ResNet HERS energy rating index score. So how you evaluate insulation, for example, is different for when you're creating an energy rating index score versus how you're looking at that material from a code compliant perspective. So again, it just brings up the need for a conversation to happen between the authority having jurisdiction and that third party to make sure that everybody's on the same page for what you're looking at and in essence, how you're looking at it. And then lastly, the third part of the proposal is getting at reporting to ensure that the third party is reporting properly per the needs of the city and the project that they're actually working with. So that's the basis of the proposal, and available if you have any questions.
Thanks, Robbie. Committee members, hold tight. We're going to turn it over to the general public. General public, anybody that wants to speak in favor or in support of this, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. And last call for general public. Anybody that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, general public, anybody that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Third and final call for the general public to speak in opposition. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to turn it back over to the committee. Committee, at this point, we're going to ask that you only ask questions. If you have questions about this proposal, please raise your hand. Eric, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mr. Swartz, this proposal and the proposal that immediately follow it on our agenda, number 104 today, both have revisions to R105.4 and subsections, and those revisions are they're different, not in alignment. The question is there a preference of one proposal over the other? Can you just maybe explain that a little bit more to help the committee understand the intended changes to subsections of 105.4? Thank you.
I think the base components of the two are the same, except for in the next proposal that we're going to be looking at, it calls out specifically the use of an energy rater and a city policy that is giving a $150 permit fee reduction if you're using an energy rater on that project. So the object of the second proposal is to ensure that energy rater is utilized as a third party inspection agency if you're doing that.
Okay, next up is Nathan.
I want to make sure I'm interpreting the R105.4.3 correctly. Is the intent of that every report or every inspection would have a report, whether passing or failing, and that would happen across all homes with a third-party inspector?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, next up is Kevin.
Thanks. Just a quick question, maybe for Eric. I understand the intent of this. Does this create more or less work for the plan reviewers?
In terms of the plan review, limited to no work during the actual plan review process. The city would need to come up with an approved third-party inspection criteria for this work, and then the documentation would create a relatively small amount of additional work in terms of receiving the documents from our inspections teams.
Got it. I appreciate the intent behind it. It just sometimes those things have unintended consequences, so that helps understand. Thank you.
Okay, Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, Robbie, another question for you. Because of the similarity, again, in 105.4.1, 4.2, and 4.3 in this proposal. If the committee were to disapprove this and then just move to the next proposal, which includes all of that, do you see any potential problem with that just due to the redundancy?
No, I think it was an unintended consequence, and that makes a lot of sense to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, committee, any other questions on this proposal? I see none. I did see a hand from the general public. I did, since we did go through that real quick, I won't do this all the time, but since there wasn't any support or opposition, normally we wouldn't ask for any rebuttals, but I did see a hand go up. So since we went through that pretty quick, I'm going to say, general public, if there's anybody that wants to speak in rebuttal for support of this, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Okay, and then anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. I see one, and that is Nathan. Nathan, you are allowed to talk if you want to speak. You have 1 minute.
Sure. So the one question that I have is on the cost of this to the design and construction. Obviously, there probably isn't anything in the design of it, but how would the cost be reallocated, I guess, from permit fees to paying this third-party company?
Sure, Nathan, thank you for that question. We're at the point for speaking in support or opposition, and you can speak your mind. However, just know that your question might not be answered because it's supposed to be more of a in support or not in support kind of thing. So, but thank you for expressing that. We will go ahead and mute you and turn it back over to the committee. So committee, now I ask you this time for anybody to have any discussion. This is your time to make a motion or have discussion. Please raise your hand. Robbie, go ahead.
Based on Eric's comment and my failure to realize the similarity between this proposal and the next proposal, I think it might make sense to disapprove this one quickly and move to the next proposal.
So Robbie, are you withdrawing your proposal then?
Yes, I think it makes sense. I didn't realize what Eric had brought up.
Okay, great. So I don't believe we need a vote on that since you were the person that brought that to the table. So we are going to, this proposal is now no longer item of conversation, and it is now being withdrawn from the process. So thanks for doing that. We will open up to the next item, which is number 104.
So again, I apologize for that, and thank you, Eric, for pointing that out. This proposal makes two additional changes to what to this section of the code compared to what I mentioned before. First of all, with regards to required inspections in R 105.2, this proposal includes a new section with regards to inspection reporting that specifically points out that the blower door test, duct leakage testing results, and other certificates need to be turned in order to gain the certificate of occupancy. It's a small thing, but it is happening today, not necessarily in Denver, but in other jurisdictions that, as of yesterday, for example, I did a blower door test on a home that had already received its certificate of occupancy, and it's just kind of backwards in the process that's intended by the code there. Moving down to section R 105.4, it's really the same third-party inspection agency additions there with the addition of the R 105.4.2.1 energy rater section there, which is again taking a city policy and putting it into the language of the code so that it can be administered and made aware, in essence, to everybody who's taking part here. So there's basically this $150 permit fee reduction that's available when you're using this third party. And then the third party process is kind of outlined as I outlined it before. So thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Robbie. We will open it up to the general public. Anybody that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Third and final call for anybody that wants to speak in support of this from the general public. Okay, seeing none, we'll move to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Third and final call for the general public. Anybody who wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, I'll turn it back over to the committee. Committee, this is your time to ask questions only of this proposal. Jeff, go ahead.
So Robbie, I just want to make sure I'm understanding it clear. Are you saying in 105.4.2.1, are you requiring that whoever's doing that blower door testing be a HERS rater or be in compliance with IECC or have IECC residential energy inspector plans, or is that only a requirement for the energy rater, not necessarily the person doing the blower door test?
Uh, 105.4.2.1 is specific to the energy rater.
Thank you. That answers my question. Thanks.
Okay, next up is John.
Actually, just kind of wanted to bring up the point Nathan was trying to make on the previous proposal. Cost right now, the cost of construction or cost of design is listed as no impact. I'm not sure that's going to be the case. You know, we talk about the $150 reduction for the building permit fee for new homes available to builders, et cetera, who use an approved third-party inspection agency specifically for energy rating. But we've got nothing listed there concerning a third-party inspection agency that would be inspecting items that would normally fall under the purview of city inspections, which we'd be paying for through our permitting process as normal. And then does the city of Denver have any sort of vetting process for these third-party inspection agencies? Obviously, we're not just dealing with the simple IRC, we're also dealing with all of Denver's amendments and changes to those codes that these third-party inspectors would have to be inspecting against.
Yeah, John, this is Eric Browning. I can speak to that. With respect first to the third-party inspections, I would maybe answer a note that this code language gives the authorization to use third-party for those other parts that you're asking about, but does not mandate. And as such, the city inspectors very well could and would complete the inspections on those other areas. With respect to the process, the vetting, and the question that was asked on the previous proposal, the city would need to develop a process and a list for identifying approved third-party inspectors. So if this is passed, then that's something that the city would be tasked with.
Okay, next up is Nathan.
Thanks. I have two questions on this. The first is relation to R 105.4.1. Is there any concern about the language, and this is maybe for Eric to answer, any concern about the language where it's saying deputies of the authority having jurisdiction? Is there any concern that this creates any sort of liability for the city or any sort of concerns?
Nathan, this is Eric. Potentially, this is language that would need to be vetted by our city attorney's office. And if there was a concern or conflict, we may choose to revise that so that we weren't necessarily delegating powers to a third-party inspector, but we were allowing ourselves to receive reports from third-party inspectors, and then ultimately it would be the city who makes the decision on approving or denying that information based on the report versus deputizing per se a third-party entity. I could foresee that being an issue, but we would resolve that internally with some cleaned up language from our attorneys.
Thank you, Eric. My second question is for Robbie as well. You mentioned the three, I guess, 4 credentials: the ResNet HERS Rater, the IECC HERS Compliance Specialist, the IECC Residential Energy Inspector, and then there's the Plans Examiner as that 4th optional one. Is there any concern about excluding BPI inspectors or the HERS RFI Rating Field Inspector certification? It just seems like it would severely limit the number of people eligible. And I would say that these are actually eligible people that should be allowed.
Yeah, the BPI credential definitely demonstrates a level of competency for doing blower door tests and duct leakage tests and whatnot. It doesn't necessarily indicate a level of competency to do the other code type inspections that a jurisdiction might allow this type of individual to use to do there. So that's really the rationale for the limitation. And I guess I would say right now, I don't think that there's a limitation. There isn't the same type of limitation for people who are doing blower door tests or just doing a blower door test for a builder to get their compliance. So I think they can still use a building analyst or somebody else from BPI.
Okay, next up we have Mike.
Yeah, just for some clarity's sake, on R105.4, on the previous proposal, it discusses third-party inspection agencies not affiliated with the building design or construction. On this proposal, you struck the not affiliated with the building design or construction. Was that intentional on this one, or an oversight on the other?
No, it is intentional because the majority of energy raters are being asked to are being asked to help with compliance using the performance pass in the code, which includes an energy model. And because they're doing the energy model, they might be also offering recommendations for the level of insulation or something else that's going into the house there.
Next up, we have Eric.
Yeah, as a follow-up to that, Robbie, and I appreciate Mr. Walton's previous question. Do you believe that potentially creates a conflict of interest with respect to the third-party inspection agency?
No, I don't, because the jurisdiction having authority, in this case, Denver, is the complete gatekeeper of a bill, and they're giving the authorization to the individual energy rater in this case to be able to do this work, and you can take that authorization away at any given time.
Okay, I see no more questions. I will open it up to committee discussion or motions at this time. So anybody that has any discussion or wants to make a motion on this, please raise your hand. So I don't see any hands. Okay, Eric, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I will make a motion to approve with the intent to modify.
Okay, and what's the modify which section?
So there will be these two modifications here. First, within subsection R 105.4.2.1 for the energy rater, the proposal includes the specific dollar amount for the reduction in permit fee. I would propose that we strike the exact dollar amount so that the city can adjust that accordingly, perhaps to offer an additional incentive to offset some of the costs that were raised as questions previously. If we keep it in this fixed 150 amount, the city would have no authority to adjust that credit per se. So I would ask that we simply just strike the dollar amount and just keep it as generic a reduction, and then we can put that dollar amount in our fee policy, which we have the ability to modify without having to go back through city council approval, which, as we all know, can be a long process. So that would be the first one, is just to strike 150. And then the next one in the section below, our 105.4.3, as opposed to referring to IBC section 1704.2.4, I would propose that we instead refer to the Denver Administrative Provisions section 141, which is for special inspections. And that also incorporates chapter 17, but it seems like a more appropriate reference from my perspective. Those are the two that I have at this point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this is a motion with the intent to modify. So again, this isn't necessarily that we're modifying it on the spot. This is a motion to say that you approve it as written, but those two sections are to be worked out at a later time, knowing that those things can be modified, just those two things. So just so everybody's clear, that's what the motion is on the floor. Next up, Nathan.
I was going to throw out a second or a different motion. So I don't know if that's appropriate at this time.
Sure, go right ahead.
I was going to throw out a motion to disapprove. I think that I understand the reasoning behind why this proposal was written, and I have experienced some of the frustrations, especially around R 105.4.1, but I don't see it as necessary, and I don't see it as providing a lot of clear or clarification to those trying to follow the code.
Okay, thank you. That would be a discussion point at this time, since there's already a motion on the floor, but certainly a great discussion point. Next up, we have Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I actually wanted to come back, assuming that we can get a second and the committee would agree to approve the modifications. I would ask the committee to allow the city to revise our 105.4.1 with recommendations from our city attorney's office essentially just so that it's clean and enforceable and we don't get ourselves into a legal hurdle. So that would just be something that we'd coordinate with our city attorney's office without having specific language to propose right here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Eric. So there currently is a motion with the 3 highlighted sections on the screen to approve with the intent to modify those 3 items at a later time. Is there a second for that?
I second it.
Okay, I didn't catch who that was.
Carol.
Oh,
Patrick.
Carol. Okay, thanks, Carol. So thanks. So there is a second on the table. So with that, now we call for a vote. So all those in favor, let me back up. I always do this. Let's make sure we got the correct number of voting members on there. So I'm gonna go to our note taker, Erica. Erica, can you confirm how many voting people we have currently?
We are at 24 voting members.
Okay, thank you. So we would need 13, the majority, to pass this. So I'll ask a call for vote. All those in favor of approving this proposal with the intent to modify the 3 yellow highlighted sections at a later date, please raise your hand. Okay, I still see hands going up. Please keep those up. Okay, I'm going to count you 18. Sorry, that went up to 20. Go ahead and lower your hands. I'm going to lower the hands for you. Okay, all those opposed, please raise your hand. All those opposed, 0. Okay, any abstentions, please raise your hand. I see 4. Okay, so you can lower your hands. This proposal does pass 20 to 0 to 4. Thank you for that. Next up, we have item number 11. Robbie, I believe this one's yours as well. You can start talking while I pull it up.
Yes, so Robbie Schwartz with Built Tank Inc., representing the city of Denver. This proposal is with regards to all electric buildings, a definition for all electric buildings to be added. The definition is really needed in order to clearly have a defined end goal here for the 2030 goal moving forward here. So I hope that you've had a chance to read the definition, and we don't need to read it right now, and I'll end my comment there. Unless you'd like me to read it.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie. We go to the general public. Anybody from the public that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I will go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. And third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, I'll turn it back over to the committee. Committee, this is your time to ask any questions. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. Chuck, go ahead.
Yes, thanks, Kevin. Robbie, the final sentence of the definition, all electric buildings may include solar, thermal, water, and pool heating. I was curious if you could expand on why that last sentence is necessary in this definition.
My understanding is that all electric buildings, if you're using solar thermal, that's not an electric generation. It's not generating electricity. Therefore, it needed to be called out specifically because you're limiting all other fuel sources except for solar thermal.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have Courtney.
Hey, Robbie. So because this is for the Denver Green Code and for the IECC, I see it as relevant in the Denver Green Code because we have proposals that relate or reference all electric buildings, where you don't seem to have that specifically in the IECC. We have proposals about electrification of certain space heating or water heating. So I'm wondering if you see this as necessary for the IECC itself.
I believe that it is necessary for the IECC itself. There are proposals to be electric ready, and there is hope to create some incentives to go all electric as well. So defining what that means, I think, makes sense in both codes.
Okay, next up we have Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin. Say, Robbie, quick question for you. I wondered if, when you were drafting this, if we considered the inclusion of no on-site combustion, and it might clarify that previous question about the solar thermal that allows for a way for, alternative generation of heat without combustion. It clarifies that matter, prohibits combustion.
I guess the short answer is no, that wasn't considered. I'm not sure that it shouldn't be considered, but it does say no fuel gas or propane. So I think it alludes to that same point.
Yeah, I think somebody wonky on our side was saying, well, they could still burn pellets.
Okay,
I
next
guess,
up we have, oh, go ahead.
well, I was just thinking there, somebody could make a proposed modification, I guess, at this point.
Sure, absolutely. Right now we're in questions, but that, they can keep that in mind with that feedback. Next up, we have Linda.
Good afternoon. My question was related to what Kevin just brought up, and then another one, and that was, I assume that the use of gas-fired fireplaces is included in the city's goals, but by referring to space heat, it's a little bit unclear on whether a gas-fired furnace or fireplace, pardon me, would be considered space heating or something else, and whether it would be allowed or disallowed. I'd curious about that. And I had another one about whether there's the building is what we're trying to identify here, or really whether it's the whole property, because potentially this would allow for combustion, fire pits, or other cooking. So is it permanently installed combustion?
Sure, great questions, Linda. I don't know if anybody from the city or Robbie, being a subject matter expert on this, knows, but the question is, does the definition for the city for this pertain to fireplaces and or outdoor fire pits or other outdoor combustion?
This is Eric Browning with City of Denver. With respect to the first sentence of the definition, I believe it would exclude fireplaces, because in order to have a fireplace, regardless of whether it was considered space heating, it would have to have plumbing installed. And the first sentence says has no fuel gas or propane plumbing installed before the comma. So it was our interpretation that it would not allow for gas-fired fireplaces, or for that matter in, well, we're not talking about large apartment buildings in this particular case, but on the commercial side in large apartment buildings, if we were gas-fired, natural gas-fired grills and things of that nature. So that's the best I can answer the question at this point.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Brian.
Hello, my question is the intent to not allow natural gas to be brought to a building to feed a generator for backup power? especially for that first sentence.
Robbie, do you want to chime in?
The intent is not to bring natural gas to the site. I'm not sure that that particular situation was considered. Again, there might, might mean that you would consider a modification with an exception for that particular need. But, you know, as we're moving towards zero energy homes, the need for the ability to shelter in place with the thermal envelopes that are needed might make that need for a backup generator that's using fossil fuels rather might not be needed. So that's another thing to consider.
Thanks for that input. Next, we have Ken.
Brian and Linda asked my questions for generators, fire pits, so I'm lowering my hand.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Laura.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments on backup generators. In addition, when we say all electric building, you know, are we, you know, when we approve this, are we approving this definition to be used in different contexts? I just see that there could be some unintended consequences depending on building type, building size, thresholds, etc. So just kind of the scope of this proposal. Clarification would be good.
Robbie, any feedback or input on that question?
Well, this is in the residential section, so an all electric building would be defined, the building portion would be defined by the residential code that Denver has amended that definition in the last cycle.
Okay, I had heard that this is a similar definition being used in
the Denver Green Building Code as well. This is proposed to go into that code as well for the residential section.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
All right, next up with the question would be Mark.
I think I was just following on with Kevin. I was thinking about wood-fired or combustible heating sources. But notice in the second sentence or after the comma, it says that uses electricity as the sole source of energy for space heating. So I think that kind of answers my question there. I do think I would have a question about backup generators being used. So maybe some type of exception or addition to the last sentence might be warranted.
Sure. So since this is a question period, Robbie has stated that he is open to making a modification to that. So any other questions at this time for this proposal from the committee?
Yeah.
Laura, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question on, you know, asking for modification for exemptions. If, let's say, the space heating, it's on electric, is insufficient for the residential home due to the size, how would one go about getting a modification?
So I think we're looking at two different things. You're asking for a modification from the city, like an exemption from the city, but not necessarily a modification to this proposal. Is that what I hear the question is?
That's right. When I feel like we're narrowing ourselves as a sole source of energy for its space heating with that sentence.
Sure. So I'll ask the city then the more directed question. Would there be, as written, this proposal, would there be an ability for somebody to file for an exception of this definition?
This is Eric Browning with the City of Denver. It's unlikely that there would be an alternative or an exception to the definition. It just simply wouldn't be an all-electric building.
Thanks. Any
If I
other
can,
questions?
I'm sorry,
Go
excuse me. This is in response to some of the questions that were brought up regarding backup generators, which obviously would apply to multifamily and commercial buildings. That being said, I believe that coordination with our partners in fire department are absolutely necessary. I feel like it is very uncommon for them to allow natural gas backup generators. Not that they don't exist, but just very uncommon in that typically it's going to be a independent diesel on those. So for whatever that's worth. Thank you.
Hi, this is Carol
Okay,
Pafford. Just tagging off of what Eric just said. Just to clarify something, that the Denver Fire Department does not allow natural gas for optional standby generators. I'm sorry, they only allow natural gas for optional standby generators. They will not allow natural gas to be used for any sort of emergency or legally required generators. So I just wanted to throw that out there that you're unlikely to see a whole lot of natural gas for generators regardless.
Thanks for clarifying that, answer that question, Carol. Just a quick reminder, please do not use the chat for your comments. There is going to be a time for that. It is distracting to all of us. So if you do have comments, there is going to be a comment discussion category section. So please, just a quick reminder on that. Next question, we have Brian.
I just wanted to add on to the generator question. For the most part, in houses, generators are natural gas. They are not legally required. It's something that just a homeowner wants. So it would probably be the main type of generator that would be installed in a house.
Hi, this is Carol. I would agree with you. For residential buildings like apartment buildings, though, however, you do have optional standby generators. If it is, then it would be allowed to be natural, but you are correct with single family homes.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay, any last call? This is last call for questions on this proposal. Ken, go ahead.
Yeah, one quick question here. I don't know if you guys considered fuel cells at all that were natural gas generated in this condition since they're non-combustion. I wasn't sure if that was considered. I imagine not, since it's not touched on.
Again, this is Carol. It is allowed by the code, but I don't believe we have discussed that.
Okay. All right, that being the last question that we had, now I'll open it up for discussion. So this is your time. If you want to make a comment to any of those questions that you had or people had, feel free to raise your hand. This is the time to do that. Also, this time is if anybody wanted to make a motion. There's a lot of talk about maybe modifying this. So anyway, this is the time for discussion or making a motion. Nathan, your hand's up first.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the comment that this is just a definition, that this is not saying that Denver is requiring all electric buildings. It's just saying here's a common definition that we can use that, possibly a future proposal may say, yes, based on this definition, we're requiring that this type of building be all electric. So I think that's a reasonable, easy to get behind definition.
Okay. Anybody else? I don't see any hands, so we do need a motion at some point. So if there's no discussion, someone can make a motion. Chuck, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure I want to make a motion yet, but I did want to mention one concern. So it basically allows for solar thermal water and pool heating. It's not so common to see solar air heating in Denver anymore. At one point, it was a pretty prominent technology. Solaron sold it. We do see solar vent preheat systems, although those tend to be more on commercial buildings as opposed to residences. I think we may see systems that capture the waste heat from rooftop PV and preheat heat pumps in the wintertime to capture all that heat that's lost from PV panels. And so I would suggest that we not limit it to solar thermal water and pool heating, that we also allow solar thermal air heating in the various ways that it can occur. It may be sufficient just to say solar thermal heating and not even distinguish between water and air. The other thing I wanted to bring up, and maybe it's outside the scope of this, but someone raised an interesting point, and that is, all electric building could conceivably use a fuel cell with natural gas. And certainly that's not what we're after. We're trying to keep natural gas off the site, whether it's used for combustion or whether it's used in a fuel cell application. So again, I don't know if it's relevant to this definition of an all-electric building, because it still would be electric, but I would hate to see us in any way be supporting the use of natural gas fuel cells.
Next up, we have Courtney.
I had a question for you, Kevin. Are we voting on these separately for IECC versus Denver Green Code? I don't think we've gotten to one like this yet, so just checking.
That's a good question. I guess if there's enough people that feel strongly that it shouldn't be the definition across both of those, we can split that up. But I haven't seen anybody raise that concern besides you. So when someone's making a motion, that motion can be to split up the definition between the IECC and the Denver Green Code. That is a possibility.
Yeah, I think I see them as necessary in the Denver Green Code, because the electric ready proposals, I don't believe reference all electric buildings. I think within the requirements, they specify what that means. So I'm just a little hesitant to vote for an all electric building definition in the IECC, and want to rely on the proposals themselves to help guide that there. But in the Denver Green Code, there are proposals that do reference an all electric building. So that's my perspective on trying to separate those.
Sure, thank you. That's good perspective for the committee to take into account. Eric, you're up next.
Thank you. Just with respect to the organization of the codes, we would certainly want the definitions across the different codes to be the same, versus having a different definition of all electric in the energy code versus something different in the green code or anywhere else. So just for the committee's knowledge, we would expect those definitions to carry across all codes with the same wording.
Thank you. Next, we have Nathan.
I'm going to propose that we adopt this and amend or motion to adopt and amend this with the specific amendment being focused on the first sentence to instead of specifically reference fuel, gas, or propane plumbing, put something specific to no combustion equipment.
Okay, so there's a proposal to amend, or a motion to amend this proposal, and I wrote that on the screen for you all to see, just so you can see that. Okay, thank you, Nathan, for the motion there. Is there a second or any other discussion? Carol, go ahead.
Just a thought, would that include diesel generators? If you had a diesel generator, the building would not be all electric. I'm not sure if that's considered combustion equipment.
Nathan, since this is your modification, go ahead and if that's the intent of your modification.
Yeah, I would consider a diesel generator as definitely combustion equipment.
That could be a
Next, Eric.
problem.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that
Go
could be a
ahead, Carol.
problem. In the Denver Fire Code, they require that emergency elevators have a separate source of power that switches, automatically switches, and they preclude using a separate service for that. So if you're not allowing it, let's say they want to be an all-electric building, but they're not allowed to use a diesel generator, there's no way to meet the code. Just thought I'd bring that up. So they could never be considered an all-electric building.
Okay, thank you for that. Someone talking? Oh, go ahead.
I mean, I would say that I'd be open to an exception, maybe something around life safety equipment. And that would be reasonable for this as well.
That would have been my proposal, Nathan, would be to include exceptions for code required backup generators or life safety equipment. And when we use the term code required, that also recognizes that if someone wants to voluntarily put a backup generator in their home that's natural gas fuel sourced, it is then no longer meets the definition of an all electric building. So I feel like that could solve that issue.
Okay, Eric, are you willing to put that in your motion?
Did you mean Nathan?
Oh, sorry, Nathan. Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
sorry about that.
Yeah, absolutely willing.
Okay. Okay. Next up, we have Jamie. Jamie, you are muted. You are calling in on your phone. I think you have to press *6 to be unmuted. There you go. You were unmuted. Now there you go. You got it now.
I think you just banned fire pits with wood and charcoal grills. So someone should read through that and see if that was the intent.
And I think maybe something like a permanently installed piece of equipment might be more reasonable. I don't want to ban anybody's, grill.
Nathan, can you explain the benefit of going to combustion equipment versus leaving the fuel, gas, and propane plumbing in there? What's the real difference, and what are you trying to get at?
I'm trying to think about pellets and diesel and anything that's not propane or natural gas. There's just a lot of other ways for combustion to happen.
Okay, next up, Antonio.
Thanks, Mr. Moderator. I would just back up with what Eric and Carol were saying too for life safety. I mean, perhaps we could include, the code talks about 90 minutes for a battery, for backup there. If we can include perhaps on the exception that it's limited to that 90 minutes, perhaps that might make some of the other members feel a little more comfortable with having that diesel.
Okay, so Nathan, take that into consideration because this is your motion. Next up is Elizabeth.
Okay, hey everybody, I apologize. I had to step out for a few minutes for a kid thing. But I just wanted to add my support here to crossing out the fuel, gas, or propane plumbing, especially as it may apply to existing buildings that may just have that plumbing. And if we're trying to encourage electrification, we don't want to exclude existing buildings from being under a definition of being all electric. That's all.
Thank you. All right, so committee, keep that in mind. Next up, we have Carol.
Just wanted to point out again that we're not, or this proposal is not barring natural gas or wood burning stoves. It's not banning any of that. It's just the building itself would not be considered an all electric building. This is just a definition.
Thank you for clarifying that. Next up, we have Mark.
Yeah, for me, it's a big change when you switch from fuel, gas, or propane plumbing to combustion equipment, because combustion equipment can cover so many things that have a combustion process. I was thinking with fuel gas or propane plumbing, it definitely keeps out the natural gas type of backup generator, but would allow diesel fired ones. I guess that is, we're also trying to incorporate diesel fired and wood pellets from not being part of the electric building. That's the intent, correct?
Correct. And I would say I'd be open to maybe having something like permanently installed combustion equipment, so that anything like a
permanently installed,
a barbecue grill. And again, it's a definition. It's not and I might be wrong, but I did not see a proposal saying that yes, a building must meet this all electric requirement. It might be in the green code, but I did not see it in the IECC.
Yeah, I think it's qualification to the standard, right? If you want to be considered an all electric building and get those benefits, you would need to fit in here. I just want to make sure we're fitting what's supposed to fit in there.
Okay, so next up we have Brian.
Recognizing that this is just a definition, I'm wondering if we get rid of the exception, and when somebody tries to apply this definition in another section, they would put those exceptions in there as they come up for that individual section. So if somebody says this, in another code section, they require an all electric building except for emergency systems and legally required standby systems. And that way we don't have to try and think of every exception. We're just giving a definition of what an all electric building is. And then in each code section, they could worry about the exceptions if they want to apply this definition.
Yeah, I'll jump in there real quick because I think you're spot on, because I don't think there's any precedent for having an exception in a definition. The definition is defining something, and then you would, like you said, add an exception in a particular code section that's using the definition.
I am all for that.
Great.
Yeah, I think having an exception in the definition makes it messy and difficult.
This is Carol. I agree with that as well.
So Nathan, great. So Nathan, are you withdrawing this exception from your motion?
Yes.
Great. Next up, we have Ken.
Yeah, and I think removing that exception probably addresses mine, but I just wanted to make sure as we move into those various sections in the future that we're being aware of unintended consequences. For example, mission critical applications, there's numerous of those in the Denver County market that utilize generators for backup that aren't necessarily under the definition of life safety. They are standby. I'm talking data centers and other mission critical type facilities, just something to be aware of.
Very good. Next up, we have Mark.
Yeah, last commenter made me think of something. Instead of an exception, maybe this section could be added to the end of the last sentence. So maybe all electric buildings may include solar thermal water and pool heating and code required life safety systems. And it's not an exception, part of the definition.
Okay. That's something for Nathan to consider. Since it's his motion, Nathan, I'll give you time to think about that while we go to the next person. Chuck.
Yeah, I would like to suggest that on that last sentence, we say something that doesn't seem to exclude solar air heating. We could say all electric buildings may include the utilization of solar thermal energy. It may be as simple as that. Or we could add solar air heating as well as water and pool heating.
Okay, again, Nathan, that's feedback for your modification. I'll give you some time while we go to the next person, Jamie.
I think to Ken's comment, this definition only goes in our 2.0 in the residential section, right? This is not a commercial section definition. Is that correct?
Ken, feel free. Yes, this is for residential. So yeah, we are thinking about that. But Ken, if you want to chime in.
Yeah, I thought I heard a comment that there was a desire to maybe have this definition be somewhat universal across all of the various codes, including beyond the residential. And I think what we've talked about previously about maybe eliminating those exceptions and moving them elsewhere in the code kind of addresses some of my concerns.
And this is Eric with the City of Denver regarding my early comment regarding definitions of in other places. My comment was that if we copy this definition into other codes outside of the residential portion of the energy code, we would want that definition to be consistent. That's not what this proposal is proposing to do, but down the road, we would want that to be consistent across codes.
Thank you for that clarification. Jamie, did that answer your question?
Not really. So is this going to apply to commercial buildings, or is it only exclusively going to apply to residential? I could care less if it goes in residential in the green code as well. But as soon as it starts encroaching on commercial, then I have different opinions on this.
Sure. Anybody want to have a conversation about that, or have any input that they want to provide?
Jamie, I'd be interested to hear what you're. Oh, I'll let the people who raise their hand go.
Okay. So Jamie, you still have a comment question on the table, but I think that's all you had at the moment. So it's still an open question to the committee for consideration. Alan, you're up next.
Yeah, just piggybacking on Jamie's concern is this. To me, this proposal was for a definition in the residential portion of the IECC and not necessarily the commercial portion. And then the question after that is are we voting for it to be in the Denver Green Code and in the IECC, or one or the other? So I'd like clarification if the intent is to put it in both sections of the IECC, commercial and residential, and then the Denver Green Code is a different portion that Courtney was alluding to.
Sure. So I'll answer that. This proposal, as written, is for only the IECC and the DGC residential portion. So that's as written. It doesn't mean that you all have to decide that. It could be split up. Now the city has voiced their concern that they would like to have the definitions be close throughout all the codes, not just these two, but the proposal is just for these two IECC and Denver Green Code residential sections. Christy, you're up next.
I was just going to suggest that I think we've all been talking about this definition with residential buildings in mind until this question was raised about commercial buildings. And I think that would open a different set of considerations. So we might want to say that this is the definition of an all-electric residential building, which could very feasibly differ from the definition of an all-electric commercial building, so that then that all-electric residential building definition can carry across all of our codes. We can have a separate conversation about commercial buildings as appropriate.
Great. So something for Nathan to consider on his motion. Nathan will give you time to think while we go to the next person. Chuck.
Thank you. Couple comments I have is just the permanently installed combustion equipment. There could be an outdoor kitchen that is installed at a residence that has the portable propane tank that per this definition would now be prohibited potentially. And then the last sentence with the solar, I agree with Chuck, by the way, great name, that the solar, thermal, water, and pool heating is kind of limiting in the ability to use solar. And it doesn't limit other opportunities like with geothermal, because you're using the energy from the ground in the winter. It doesn't limit that as well. I just doesn't need to be included. Those are my two comments.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Elizabeth.
Yeah, Christy basically said exactly what I was going to say, but I would agree to leave the door open for a potentially different definition for all electric for commercial buildings, that we revise this to be all electric residential building, just to be really clear, and to leave that open for a different definition for commercial.
All right, thank you. Any other discussions, comments on the current motion that's shown on the screen? Nathan, if you want to make any modifications to your motion, feel free. You've had some time to think about it, but right now there is a motion to modify this definition, and that modification is on the screen. So if there's any discussion or a second, please raise your hand. Eric, go ahead.
I will second the motion.
Okay, so now that we have a second, now it's time to call a vote. So we are voting on the modification. Nathan, did you have something to add?
Oh, I was going to continue to modify. I do think that including the all-electric residential building portion is valuable, and I am open to address the concerns about excluding other forms of solar thermal or geothermal to just delete the last sentence. The solar thermal equipment is getting free solar energy and then using electricity and pumps to move it around. I think that's reasonable.
Okay, so since we had a second on that, I want to make sure the person who seconds, which is Eric, is okay with that to still second us. He's shaking his head yes.
I am, yes.
So Chuck, okay, Chuck, you do have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just had one more comment. If we delete the last sentence, opening the door to using solar or geothermal, do we also need to delete the word sole source as the electricity as the sole source of energy? Because at that point, it's possibly not the sole source of energy.
Sure. So that I think we can codify, if you will, if everybody's okay with that, to make sure that if that's the intent, I guess I should ask Eric, is the intent for your modification to get rid of that or not? But again, consider that we have some other hands up. Next, we'll go to Carol.
I was going to say exactly the same thing that Chuck said, to remove the word sole. Otherwise, you're basically saying that all you can have, the use of electricity, the sole source of energy, precludes using anything else. So I would recommend the same thing.
Okay, thank you, Carol. Next up, we have Elizabeth.
I was just going to say you could maybe clarify that by saying it's the sole source of purchased energy. Because your geothermal is anything from the earth, anything passive solar, that's free, right? So anything that's purchased, whether it's gas, propane, electricity, wood pellets, anything you have to buy. I guess that doesn't, if you're chopping your own wood on your own property, maybe that doesn't totally solve that, but maybe it gets to the point of it.
Sure. Okay, so Nathan, those things are, they were considered. Carol, your hand is still up. Did you have anything else to add?
Yes. I think what Elizabeth said is correct, calling it purchase, but I'm not sure that the public or the design community, development community will understand that terminology.
Okay.
I was going to suggest changing from sole to primary or main source of energy. That does open the opportunity for backup, or for people to say, oh, it uses 51% electricity and 49% natural gas, and I worry about that. So I'm leaning towards Elizabeth's sole source of purchased energy. That's, to me, not terribly difficult. And I think we can explain that fairly easily.
Okay, so Eric, you had seconded this. Are you okay still with that, with your second, with that change there?
I do have concerns about using the term purchased, and quite frankly, we're not purchasing energy, are we? I mean, we're purchasing a fuel source, perhaps, or using a source for just purchasing energy. I have concerns about that, and then one could argue that you need all of the equipment and systems in order to convey that energy. So solar panels, et cetera. So I'm not a huge fan of the purchased. I'm open to hearing, you know, more in terms of using that, but I feel like there could be some concerns with that purchased language.
Okay, so I'm hearing that you want to withdraw your second on this just because of that. Is that correct?
Unless Nathan is okay not using purchased, then I would.
Okay.
I'm okay not using
Nathan, think about
purchased.
that.
But I don't think it is an issue for saying sole source of energy as electricity. I don't think that specifically excludes geothermal, or maybe we say that uses electricity, thermal energy, or geothermal energy as a source of energy.
Yeah.
Okay, next we have Robbie.
Yeah, I think the last sentence that got struck is specifically, I think, included there to address this issue that's being discussed right now. And I think you could just make it broader to say all electric buildings may include renewable energy sources. Something like that, that covers geothermal, covers solar, covers wind, you know, anything that's going to help heat or cool the house and then is using electricity to distribute that.
I like that better than purchased.
Agreed.
Okay, so Nathan.
So yeah, it would be removing purchased and saying all electric buildings may include, Robbie, was it any source of renewable energy?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
One more time, may include.
I think I said all sources of renewable, but any is fine, either way.
Yeah.
Did I get that right?
There's some syntax, any source or all sources, either one.
Okay, next up we have Eric.
Yeah, sorry, I can't help myself here. Aren't trees considered a renewable resource? Like burning wood. I'm sorry, but it's.
Yeah.
You see a couple other people shaking their head on that one.
Except trees.
But
Okay,
we're already preventing combustion.
Something for the committee to take in mind. Next up, we'll move along. Chuck, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like that change to renewable energy, but I have a similar concern. Yeah, people could be burning wood. They could also be buying RNG, renewable natural gas. Do we want to allow renewable natural gas? So.
Okay, good consideration. Next up, we have Sean.
To that combustion concern, in the 2024 process, they are currently considering a definition change for biomass that would specifically exclude burning wood from the definition of renewable energy. So you could look there to pick it up, or at least you know that that question has been asked and is being addressed elsewhere.
Thanks, Sean. Next up, we have Brian.
I just wanted to go back to, this is just a definition of an all-electric building. We can just put a simple definition of all-electric building that it uses only electricity, burns no fossil fuels on site, and that's the definition of all-electric. And then whatever code section wants to adopt, you know, this definition or use this definition, they can put the exceptions, the, you know, limitations. They could say you're required to have an all electric building except for, and then they can think of all the exceptions rather than us sitting here trying to think of every exception. We can just give a simple definition of an all electric building and let the other code, panels figure out how to, use this definition or take exceptions to it in their code sections.
Thank you. Next up is Elizabeth.
Sorry, yeah, you're pointing out of the renewable energy made me go look at the code to see what is the IECC definition of renewable energy. So there's actually a different definition for on-site renewable energy under the commercial section of the IECC versus the residential section. So I just thought I'd share that with you. On-site renewable energy system under the residential, is this under the commercial section is defined as energy from renewable energy resources harvested at the building project site. So just keep that in mind as we're defining renewable energy. So I don't think purchased renewable natural gas would qualify if we define it as on-site renewable energy.
Okay, thank you. So there is a motion on the table to modify. Eric, are you still good with your second now that we've made some changes to the motion?
I am, thank you.
Okay, so seeing no more hands up in discussion, I do want to call a vote. So we are voting on the modification only. So if you're okay with the modifications, that's what you're voting on. And those modifications are on the screen right now for you to see. So all those in favor, please raise your hand. Hands are still going up. All right, I see 18. Go ahead and lower your hands. Okay, all hands are down. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, I see 4. Go ahead and lower those. And anybody that abstains, please raise your hand. Okay, 2. You can lower your hands. All right, so the modification has passed. So now we want to vote on the proposal. So I need a motion from somebody to approve this or a motion on this proposal. Go ahead, Linda.
I wanted to check with Elizabeth if you were suggesting that the words on-site be added before renewable energy in our definition.
I just dug a little more based on what Sean said about the definition of renewable energy potentially changing. So there's also a residential definition under renewable energy resources that is defined as energy derived from solar radiation, wind, waves, tides, landfill gas, biogas, biomass, or extracted from hot fluid or steam heated within the earth. So I think it probably does make sense if we're going to call a residential definition referring to renewable energy, if there's anything we want to exclude from those renewable energy resources, or if we're going to redefine renewable energy resources. That whatever you decide for those should probably align. And if we want to call it on-site, that's technically a commercial definition. We don't have that in, no, I apologize. We do have that in the residential as well.
Okay, so we did already approve the modification. So if you wanted to modify it further, someone has to make a motion for that. Otherwise, some motion on the table needs to come up, whether we approve this or not. So go ahead and raise your hand if anybody has a motion. Elizabeth, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it solves the problem if we do say may include any or all sources of on-site renewable energy.
So I take that you would like to make a motion to modify?
I think I would like to make a motion to modify.
Second.
Okay, so the modification is just to add the terms on-site. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, good. We got a second. All right, I'm going to lower your hand, Elizabeth. I'll call a vote. All those in favor of this modification of adding the term on-site, please raise your hand. Hands are still going up. All right, I have 18. Go ahead and lower your hands. 19. One snuck in there at the last minute. And all hands are down. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, 4. Go ahead and lower. And all those abstaining, please raise your hand. Okay, lower your hands. All right. So this has been approved in terms of the text, the modification of this proposal. Now we need a motion moving forward. So the motion could be to approve this if someone wants to do that. Eric, go ahead.
Make a motion to approve as modified by modifications 1 and 2.
Okay, great.
Second.
Thank you. Anybody else want to? Okay, who was that?
Nathan, I second that.
Nathan. Okay. Thank you, Nathan. All right. So I'll call a vote. All those in favor of approving as written on the screen currently, due to those 2 modifications, please raise your hand. Votes are still coming in. And still coming in. All right, lower your hands. That's 19. Okay, all hands are lowered. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, 4. Please lower your hands. All are lowered. All those abstaining, please raise your hand. Okay, 1. Go ahead and lower your hand. So this proposal has now been passed. Thank you for that. We are about halfway through, so we're going to go take a 10-minute break. I'll start the timer. You guys know the drill. We got 10 minutes. As the clock ticks down, we ask you to come back. Feel free to turn off your screen if you want, your cameras, and we'll see you in about 10 minutes. Okay, if you can hear my voice, let's start gathering back, turning your cameras on and getting ready to go. All right, welcome back, everybody. We will get into the next item of business, number 19, and this is Robbie's as well. Robbie, go ahead and take it away.
Robbie Schwartz, the Built Tank Inc., representing the city. So this section of the code applications is new to the, really in essence, new to the 2021 IECC in that they removed the terminology prescriptive and mandatory. And so this applications part describes the different compliance options, pathways that you can use through the code. In this particular section, they also included a new climate region for tropical climate zones. So this is removing that. And then also in the next section here, R401.2.5, they added additional energy efficiency packages. So depending on your compliance pathway through the code, you have to do some additional energy efficiency options here that you would find in the new section R408 of the code. So this proposal is striking that compliance option for requirement for the energy rating index alternative because the energy rating index alternative in a separate proposal is proposing to be changed to include a energy rating index that is based off of a score without on-site power production and with on-site power production so that you can track the energy performance of the thermal envelope, and you can also track the pathway towards zero energy there. And because of that, because of where those scores are being set and the trajectory towards the 2030 goal, it's really not needed to have an additional energy efficiency option for that particular pathway. So that's what this proposal is trying to do.
Thank you for the summary, Robbie. We'll open it up to the general public. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Okay, opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public? We got one. Okay, Nathan, you are allowed to speak if you want to speak.
Sure. Yep. Thanks. Yeah, I think bringing this up and limiting builders' options on which path to take just limits our options, right? It doesn't give us another path that we can explore to see if that's a better cost alternative path to go down. And I think it actually even limits a committee's, an IECC committee's opportunity to kind of adjust what needs to be adjusted from the IECC to the Denver Building Code. So striking this whole section out, I think limits that flexibility that you guys might have to adjust it as needed, because then you'd be referencing a Denver Green Building Code or something else like that. So I think it'd be good to leave it in there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, I'll turn it back over to the committee. Committee, anybody that has questions about this proposal, then now's your time to ask those. Robbie, go ahead. You can ask yourself a question if you want.
I just was going to respond to the question from the public. Is that okay?
Go right ahead.
Sure. Okay. I think there might have been some misunderstanding. First, we're taking out a section that's not applicable to our climate zone. That's the R401.2.4, the tropical climate zone. And second, within each pathway that you choose to comply with, the 2021 is making you do an additional energy efficiency package that goes beyond what that pathway is trying to get you to do. So what we're trying to strike here is that additional energy option that you have to do in the energy rating index pathway specifically. It doesn't change the requirement to do an energy efficient package that goes beyond what the prescriptive path is asking you to do or what the building performance path is asking you to do. It's only saying you don't have to do an additional energy efficiency option for the ERI pathway or the energy rating index pathway, because the energy rating index score threshold that is being required is already at that, in this case, 5% increase in efficiency.
Thanks, Robbie. Anybody else that have questions on the panel? Any questions on the panel? Committee members? Nathan, go ahead.
I want to confirm when we're, can you scroll down to the changes in the additional energy efficiency? And I also want to confirm in the supporting information, you talk about ERI. Are we talking about an IECC ERI or are we talking about a ResNet ERI?
Section 3 is specifically talking about an IECC energy rating index score. The proposal that's coming up potentially later today, is recommending that we move to what's closer to a ResNet HERS energy rating index score.
And then I guess I have another question as well. If the goal is, or you're referencing this city's climate action goal, that it seems to really focus on a ERI pathway, is there a reason why you're keeping all the other pathways in there and not focusing solely on a ERI pathway?
Yes, and yes. So the pathway to zero is most likely going to have to go to being documented through the ERI pathway. So it's the way that you can clearly demonstrate that the house has met the zero energy goal. But it is a pathway. It is an incremental approach pathway. So it was deemed not acceptable, I guess, at this time to begin to remove other compliance options. But I think that you're going to see in the next code cycle that's going to start to happen there. And you're going to have the same committee structure at the next code cycle, and you'll have to come to terms with that basically next code cycle. But this is setting up the pathway to zero here with not this proposal itself, but the energy rating index proposal that we'll see future will.
Okay, any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, I open it back up to the general public to speak in rebuttal. Anybody in opposition, since there was only someone that spoke in opposition, anybody from the general public that wants to speak and do some rebuttal in opposition, please raise your hand. And last call, anybody that wants to rebut in opposition from the general public, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, I turn it back over to you, committee, for discussion or a motion. Anybody wants to do either one of those, please raise your hand. Elizabeth, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a question. Since the goal in eliminating that section is tied to an amendment that we haven't talked about yet, does it make sense to table this one until we have talked about that one? And or maybe I'm misunderstanding the intent there.
Robbie, is this is your proposal? You probably know better than anybody else.
I don't see any reason not to follow through with Elizabeth's suggestion.
And only because we're being asked to delete a section without knowing what is replacing it, you know? So, because if that amendment doesn't pass, then we'd have to come back to this. Right?
Sure.
Okay.
Robbie, do you know what proposal that one is? Is it in our agenda today, you said?
Yes, just a second here. It's 31.
Okay, so it's pretty far down there. Okay, we can make a motion to hear both of those together. If someone wants to do that, we can, open that one up as well. If someone wants, if you feel strongly about that, Elizabeth, you could do that and ask for that. But still need any more discussion or motion on the table? Elizabeth, I see your hand still up. I don't know if that's still up or not. Okay, it's down. Courtney, go ahead.
I motion to hear the proposals together to save some time.
Okay. Is there a second on that?
Mark Rodriguez, second.
Okay, cool. All those in favor of hearing both of those together, please raise your hand. Okay, we got 21. Go ahead and lower your hands, 22. For the sake of time, we're gonna just go ahead and open up that second one. So I believe that's 31. Let me find that. And Robbie, is that your proposal as well? I don't have that open right now.
Yes.
Okay, so why don't you go ahead and give us a summary on that proposal?
This proposal is doing a few things. So if we start at the top and work our way down, it's the first thing that is added there is that it's looking at the maximum ERI values. ERI, I guess we should understand, stands for Energy Rating Index. And because of the way that it was adopted in the IECC, they used the ResNet standard for development of an energy rating index score, but in the code adoption process, they modified the standard in the core language of the code. And by doing that, they've created energy rating index has become basically a term like Kleenex that just describes something in general, and you need to have a modifier in front of it to understand which energy rating index you're talking about. And that kind of gets to Nathan's question. Some of you might not have understood Nathan's question earlier. So we're talking about the difference between a HERS ResNet energy rating index and a IECC energy rating index. And those two scores can differ on the same house by as much as 16, 17 points, depending. I was working on a house yesterday. It was 17 points difference between the two. So this is pointing you in R406.2 to a maximum energy rating index value, and how you create that energy rating index is described a little bit lower there. But before we get there, going back to the discussion of how the code in the 2021 cycle got rid of the terms prescriptive and mandatory. They instead added this table, this R406.2 table to the energy rating index pathway, and they added the exact same table to the R405 building performance table. And what this table does is say that everything that is mandatory in the prescriptive path that is now labeled as just a requirement is also a requirement of these performance path tables. The easiest one to think about is attic Eve baffles, which I'm highlighting in the table there. You can see it's on the upper half of that table. But in the past, it was not clear that if you were doing a performance path compliance method and you had a ventilated attic, that you still had to install attic Eve baffles. It's a mandatory requirement, but it was listed in the prescriptive section of the code. So what this new structure does is it makes it clear that anything that is dealing with how you install something like an attic Eve baffle is mandatory regardless of the pathway that you're choosing to use. And anything that has to do with R values or U values is something that you can trade off. You can say, I'm going to do something more in this location of the house and something less in this location, and they're going to balance each other out from an energy perspective. That's what a trade-off is trying to do. They did a pretty good job at getting all of those items that are just talking about how you install something. And this table, the underlying portions are the portions that they missed. So we're suggesting that you add those things and make them mandatory for all compliance pathways of the code. Then when you get into the base of the energy rating index pathway, we get to R406.43, which is energy rating index. This is where they modified the ANSI standard 301 for how you create an energy rating index score. So I took away those modifications and recommending that we use the ANSI ResNet 301 standard unmodified, and also the most recent version of that standard, because it's under continual maintenance. It changes there. And then we go down to the energy rating score itself, and we see that for our climate zone 5, we're recommending a change to this table that is asking for an energy rating index without on-site power production, that's OPP, and then an energy rating index with on-site power production here. So really I'm sorry, there should be some underlining here. The on-site, with on-site power production, that section should be underlined. You can see that the scores are both underlined because they changed. What this is doing is it's setting a backstop It's saying that your building thermal envelope and your mechanical systems have to be at a certain level before you can put any renewables on the house to lower the score further. And what ultimately is probably going to happen is that these numbers will continue to be adjusted in future code cycles so that the city can achieve their ultimate goal of a zero energy home. So what we know is that an energy rating index without on-site power production is limited to about 35 or 40. You can't go lower than that without adding on-site power production. So that means that you're naturally you're naturally pushing towards optimizing your thermal envelope and your mechanical systems before on-site power production is added to the house. What we're saying now is that this 50 is roughly in the realm of what the 2021 IECC is doing. It's a little bit better than what's called out in the 2021 IECC. And then we're also requiring some level of on-site power production to be used if somebody chooses to use this pathway. But what it's also doing, which I think is a little bit more important, is it's creating the structure to be able to document and in essence verify that the house is going to be zero energy in the future when we get to that point in future code adoptions there. It's giving us the actual structure to be able to ensure that we're getting what we intend to be getting in the future there. The rest of the proposal really hasn't changed except of this section, except for the numbering. It's asking for a report to be submitted at the time of permitting to get your building permit. It's asking for a report to verify compliance at the end of the construction cycle. So that's the confirmed compliance report. And then it's talking about other documentations and whatnot that is needed to, in essence, for the code jurisdiction to be able to verify that this pathway has been done and done well here. And so going back to the last proposal real quick, it's just—
all right, let's wrap it up, Robbie.
yeah, it's just showing that that proposal makes sense, that you don't need that additional energy efficiency option here because we're already setting the base efficiency of the house at an energy rating index of 50. Thanks for your time.
Okay. Thanks for tying those two together. With that, I am going to open it up to the general public. Anybody that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. And the last and final call, the general public, anybody that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll move to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Last and final call. We do have a hand raised. Nathan, you should be able to talk. Go ahead. You would have 2 minutes.
Surprising. I must be the only one in the public that's on this call. No, just teasing. I have not had a chance to read through this whole thing, Robbie. I apologize, but just kind of as you were going through it, obviously a lot of this is, increasing our house costs, increasing, the pathway of going with the ERI score. And I understand the direction that Denver's wanting to go to try and get to a single path to make it easier, maybe on the plan reviewers, make it easier on the energy raters that are out in the field. Something I would like you to maybe talk about a little bit would be the cost of construction, cost of design, and restrictiveness, how that would have no impact on building homes, I guess, if this were to pass.
Okay, thanks, Nathan. And last and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, back to the committee. Anybody that wants to ask Robbie a question on this, and Robbie, feel free to raise your hand if you want to answer the public's question as well. So anybody that has questions at this time, please raise your hand. Mark, go ahead.
Yes. As a builder or contractor, when I get to the point of choosing whether I should include on-site power production or not, how difficult of a choice is it for me to choose one path over the other? It seems like these options are definitely weighed more towards the efficiency path. Is that true? Or is that just the way I'm reading it? Mostly I'm talking about the energy rating, the maximum energy rating table. I think it was.
Robbie, you want to answer that?
Yeah. Should I? Yeah, I was wondering if I should answer things as they come or wait. So I believe the question is, which pathway would you choose if you're wanting to put on-site renewables? Right now, it doesn't matter. You can choose any pathway through the code, and you can.
Robbie, the question is more as of intent. As a builder, when I get to that choice, which way am I incentivized to go? It feels like I'm incentivized to do without on-site power production. I'm asking what your thoughts are on that, I guess.
Currently?
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, it would be easier to demonstrate compliance with the code and choose a different compliance option, and not put on or not put on on-site renewables. So this compliance pathway forces you as a builder to put on-site renewables on, and it forces you to put it forces you to achieve an energy rating index of 50 before on-site renewables are done. The other pathways potentially are more flexible. And so I guess from an incentive perspective, you would be incentivized to use another pathway if you wanted to put renewables on.
Hey, Mark, does that answer your question?
I'm not exactly sure. Sort of. Let me let some other people talk, and then I'll try to rephrase.
Sure. Okay, Mike, you're up next.
Yeah, just for clarity's sake, and I think maybe this would help Mark too. If you take the ERI pathway, you are forced to get two scores, one without the renewables and one with. So it actually mandates that you do renewables anytime you pick the ERI pathway. Is that right?
Yes, and yes, that's true. And the rationale is that we're trying to set up a pathway for the future.
But currently it probably throws it way out of whack with the other paths.
They're not exactly reciprocal, yes.
Okay, next up we have Elizabeth.
Yeah, I think I had two questions, and the last question made me have a third question. It wasn't clear to me that going with this pathway means that renewable energy is mandatory. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. Up here it says you have to I'm sorry, I'm looking at my document on my screen. So R406.4 energy rating ERI based compliance. It's right above the ERI table there. It says you have to show an ERI score without and with on-site power production. So you are required to put on enough on-site renewables in order to get to that energy rating index of 40.
Okay. Thank you. My second question is, there is sort of a backstop under R 406.3 with regard to the building envelope, where there's a whole section about how on-site renewables are not included. Here's your envelope backstop, and so you're deleting that whole thing.
Yes, because the energy rating index of 50 in and of itself is a backstop. You can't achieve the energy rating index of 50 without having a good thermal envelope. Plus, it addresses mechanical equipment, which the other sections of the code don't address.
Okay. I think I'll stop there with the questions before we get into discussion. Thank you.
Okay, no third question. All right, Paul, you're up next.
So I won't go into too much discussion at the moment, but Robbie, I thank you for all the things you put in here as someone who's still actively involved with energy ratings. A question I do have is, maybe I've missed it, but there's plenty of sites that cannot have solar on them because of trees or neighboring buildings or things like that. Am I missing something that's addressing that? I mean, there's community solar programs, the SunShare community solar and things like that that are not on site, but provide savings back to the homeowner in that model. But how do we address ones that have tall buildings or trees or other obstructions?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. As you're aware, there's a deficiency in the energy rating software analysis, in that on-site power production is the only thing that can be evaluated in the energy rating index process right now. Boulder County, for example, has gotten around that by allowing you to use the energy rating index process by inputting offsite generation and then requiring certification and documentation that energy is going to be purchased. But that's the ultimate problem, is that if you're trying to achieve a zero energy house and you're purchasing offsite power, how do you know when the house transfers, or even after the house gets its CO, that it's going to continue to purchase offsite generation from a solar garden or something? So it's a very difficult issue, and it's one at this point that I don't have a clear recommendation for how to resolve.
Okay, thanks for answering that. Next question we have coming from Chuck.
Yes, Robbie, you mentioned that the table R406.2 is just for installation requirements of building elements, and then the added sections for basement walls and slab on grade floor insulation installation requirements. Both those sections in the IECC have direct corresponding ties to the insulation table in R402.1.3. So it actually does, this table does have insulation minimum requirements that are being put in. And I just wanted to verify that that was the intent. It wasn't just the installation requirements in those code sections.
thanks for bringing that up. That was not the intent, and this table portion has been proposed at the national level for the 2024 IECC, and that oversight was also pointed out, and they suggested, they modified basically by taking out that basement wall insulation. I think it's the R402.2.8, the first part, not the installation part. And then the same, I don't think R402.2.9.1 has a specific reference to the insulation table, but I would have to look at that as well for the slab on grade floor. I think it's talking about how it's actually installed, not the R value.
All right, seeing no more questions from the committee, we did have somebody spoke up in the community. So anybody from the general public that wants to speak, have some rebuttal time in opposition, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in rebuttal or in opposition of this, please raise your hand. And last call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none. Back to you, to the committee. Committee, this is now your time for discussion or a motion. So keep in mind, we have two things at hand right now. We have this proposal number 31 and proposal number, I'm gonna split my screen hopefully so you can see, proposal number 19, that both play on each other. So you all suggested and voted to hear these together. So this is now your time to discuss either one of those or make a motion for either one and or both of those. Raise your hand if you would like to speak. Robbie, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to point out one other thing, that this is one of those proposals of the 5 proposals that Sean was talking about before, that is pretty critical to be able to reach the city's goals in the future.
And you're referring to item number 31, not item number 19 on that.
Correct.
Okay. Is there any discussion? We don't have to vote on these together, but just keep in mind that they go hand in hand with each other in terms of what you do with one potentially could cancel out the other or affect the other. So keep that in mind if you want to make a motion. Paul, you're up.
I'll just quickly say that the changes that are proposed around making the ERI index match exactly with ResNet standards is a very important one for many of the builders we work with, but that's a very, anyway, it's just a confusing variation that was put into the last code, and that's one that I say is a very strong, I strongly advise that we make that change. I've heard a lot of pushback from mostly custom builders, some larger builders in Denver. They're just like, what the heck is going on with this stuff? So, so that's a very important one. And I think many of the things are very good in this. I'm in agreement that we need to be moving, of course, towards having more renewable energy put onto homes, and homes in this case. I just have that one question caveat, what we do with homes that don't have good solar access. So I'll just state that.
Okay, thank you, Paul. John, you're up next.
I would tend to agree with Paul concerning the solar access, especially for infill work, whether it's a single scrape off or smaller volume infill multifamily, 5-10 units, whatever the case may be, in older existing neighborhoods with tall homes, tall trees. Some of these scores just may not be attainable. And I also worry then in the future, as we move towards transitioning the existing public over to net zero, how they're even going to be able to get to that point, being where they're at and the conditions that they may have.
Okay, thanks for that input for the committee. Committee, anybody else that wants to speak or make a motion? We can make a motion on item number 31, that's fine. If that's what we want to do, we don't have to, but I would encourage someone to start thinking about that, whether it's a modification or not. We have Elizabeth up next.
I apologize, everyone. I'm not as familiar with this methodology as many of you are. But with the proposed modifications, what type of project would use this compliance path versus another compliance path? And I ask that because I worry that the mandatory solar will mean that it never gets used.
Sure. So that's something for, if anybody on the committee can answer that, go ahead, just unmute and answer. I'll give you a few seconds to do so. Okay. Next up, then we have Mark.
I kind of have the same question, but maybe I'll phrase it differently. I guess this is probably what I was getting at. What, as a contractor, what incentivizes me to take the energy rating index option? How does my my ERI score without OPP compare to total building performance option and prescriptive compliance option? It seems like they meet the baseline, but then ERI forces me to also add solar. So to Elizabeth's point, if I'm not getting any benefit from adding the solar and able to reduce my ERI score to supplement it with free energy, then what's my incentive to go down that path? This is actually, and I should also point out, this language is from double disapproved proposals in the IECC process in 2021. These are returned, these are overturned, this language is overturned through consensus committee vote. It was a double disapproved by.
So Mark and Elizabeth's concern and question that's actively open to the committee is what incentivizes to go down this pathway versus a different pathway. It seems like maybe this one in their eyes will not be used because of how stringent it might be or may not be. So I think that's the open question on the table. Hopefully I got that right. Next up, we have Courtney.
Hi, so because this is one of the 5 large residential proposals we're talking about, I think it's really helpful that we heard Robbie's presentation. We're hearing questions and comments from everyone. I think we all need time to kind of digest this one a little bit more. We can all do some research and then come back for a vote at a later time. Just to make sure we're not throwing this on the table and everyone has to decide immediately. Just gathering that feedback and then coming back to a vote at a different hearing is something I would propose to table this proposal.
Okay, so I hear a motion from Courtney to table both item number 31 and item number 19. Next up, we have Chuck.
Chuck K. Okay.
Yeah.
Certainly I think we want to incentivize rooftop solar wherever it makes sense and community or solar gardens where there are serious shading issues. And I think people have raised a legitimate concern, will this mandatory requirement for solar discourage people from this pathway? And I just wonder if there's possibly a reciprocal concern. Whereas we want to encourage solar, we want to discourage bad solar. Yes. Is there any reason why people would be incentivized to put solar on a roof where it would be shaded and perform poorly? Is my question. Is that a possible outcome? And that would cause that would be a bad image for solar.
Okay. Anybody want to comment on that? Looks like Nathan, your hand's up.
Oh, I was going to second Courtney's motion. I think this is complex. There are a lot of things going on. Having some more time, one for the proponent to answer some of these open questions that we have and maybe bring some proposed amendments would be great. And just some more time for research would be preferred.
Okay. So there's a motion to table this in a second. I would remind you that as part of your homework as this committee is to come prepared for this. I know it was supposed to be heard later on, but later on in today's meeting, but we're pretty much at the time where it was going to be heard anyway. So just keep that in mind. So if there is a motion, we do need to put a date or a time on that, Courtney. So your motion was to table it. Can you make a suggestion on date? And Erica might help us with when the next residential hearing might be.
I would say the next residential hearing would be appropriate.
It's March 3rd.
Okay, March 3rd. So there is a motion on the table. I'll call a vote. Motion to table both items number 31 and 19 to be heard at the March, I already forgot the date, March 3rd, or was it 31? March 3rd, okay. March 3rd hearing. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, votes are still coming in. Okay, I see 21. Go ahead and lower your hands. Okay, all those opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, 0. All those abstaining, please raise your hand. Okay, I see 2. Okay, so these two are tabled. So I would highly suggest that you all come prepared at your next code hearing on those, not just for the open questions, but any other questions or concerns. Do your research on that. We spent quite a bit of time on these two, so we want to make sure that we get straight to the point on the next time we hear these. So next item of business, we're going to do one more here because we are getting a little bit behind. So I believe, what numbers were we on? I believe P24.5 is the next one. So Robbie, I think that one's yours if you want to start talking on that.
Yeah, Aaron McEwen put in a proposal with regards to batch sampling, and I helped work with him to create this proposal. The first thing it does is it creates a definition of what batch sampling is from a code compliance. So it's a process whereby fewer than 100% of all dwelling or dwelling units being constructed are inspected or tested to demonstrate compliance. Next, what the proposal does is it defines batch sampling, and it creates a process by which batch sampling can be carried out in a project, and also a reporting mechanism for this. So this is most often done for air leakage testing and duct leakage testing in this case, low-rise multifamily units, so that you have the consistency of the contractor base throughout that unit. It's saying that if I test, in this case, 1 in 5 units, and that one unit passes after they've demonstrated some consistency, that you can in essence assume that the other units will pass as well. So this limits the ability to sample just duct leakage and air leakage testing, but I believe it yes, an approved sampling plan. So you see the exception in the sampling process where if the jurisdiction was willing to allow other features to be sampled, so for example, the inspection of attic insulation or something, the jurisdiction has the ability to broaden what could be sampled. So say that again, this sampling process currently is limited to air leakage testing and duct leakage testing, but it gives the option to the jurisdiction to allow additional items to be sampled. And then obviously everything needs to be reported and reported well to the jurisdiction so that they have certainty that the sampling process is still maintaining the intent of what the code is trying to do with each of the dwelling units.
Okay, thank you, Robbie, for the summary. Open it up to the public. Anybody that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. And last call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Seeing none, going to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. And third and final call, anybody from the public in opposition. Okay, seeing none. Committee, I turn it back over to you. Any questions and questions only? Raise your hand. Eric, go ahead.
This is a question or perhaps a point of order. This proposal is written specific to group R2 buildings, which are not regulated under the residential provisions of the energy code. So it seems like the entirety of this proposal doesn't apply.
Doesn't somebody review these?
Sure. Robbie?
Yeah, so you bring up a good point. It's intended for low-rise multifamily, which I believe is part of the Denver's definition, and townhouse projects and those types of projects, really.
So yeah, under the residential provisions, if with modification, the only thing this could apply to would be townhomes from a multifamily perspective. I'm not sure how we want to proceed given that.
Sure. So it sounds like it still is a viable. There's still opportunities where this would come into play. It's just very, very narrow opportunity where this would come into play, is what I'm hearing. Okay. So I guess if there's going to be a motion to withdraw or anything like that, we can skip to that. But let's go ahead and go to Sean, since his hand was up next.
Thank you. I just wanted to highlight that the opportunity would be low-rise R1, low-rise R3, low-rise R4, and maybe city staff can talk about how common those R3 and R4 are by changing its scope. If you do want to apply it to R2, there are similar sampling protocols in the commercial code. So I think checking to make sure that this accomplishes something for multifamily R2 when it's in the commercial code will be a really important aspect.
Great. Since it's at a question period, anybody from the city, don't feel like you have to answer this. If you don't, I'm putting you on the spot. No, can answer Sean's question on how many potential or what percentage buildings this would fall under. Again, feel free to not answer if you don't know that. That's fine too. I'm putting you on the spot. But we'll move on to the next person in the meantime. Jeff, you're up next.
Yeah, so if I'm reading this right, so the sampling requires testing of the first 5 units. If they fail, you have to test 3 more, but if those 3 more fail, are you back to testing, or if any one of those 3 fail, are you back to testing basically 100%, and then sampling would go out the window at that point? Is that the intent?
Go ahead, Robbie.
Yes. Ultimately, you have to be able to demonstrate that 5 consecutive dwelling units can demonstrate compliance. So if the project is big enough, potentially you could get back into a sampling scenario, but most of the projects probably are not going to be big enough. So you're at a certain point, you're gonna lose the benefit of trying to sample.
Thank you. Next up is Antonio.
Thank you. This question's for Robbie. First off, with so many crews applying this application, how do we ascertain that, maybe that 6th unit is a fail? And how do we protect those homeowners who maybe we had 5 in a row that passed, and all of a sudden we have 2 that failed? There's no way to ascertain that is, that they're all going to pass. So how do you respond to that question?
I would say that that's the fundamental dilemma with sampling, and you either come down on one side of the issue or the other side of the issue, and you'll have to decide which side of the issue you come down on. But that is the dilemma with sampling. You don't know what you don't inspect. You assume that it's, statistically, you assume that it's going to be good, but you don't know.
And I guess additionally, it would be there's so many of these crews, and not to point out any contractor, but they may have 15 or 20 crews, and one crew will drop off their materials, do the installation, and the very next day, you could have a brand new crew who's just kind of looking around, going off what they have, and we're assuming that that is going to pass. Is that the factor?
Yeah, all I can say is that everything you say is a possibility. You're trying to increase your odds of looking at a number of units before they qualify to sample. And then 1 in 5 units is what you're actually looking at. And you are making an assumption that the other 4 units in that sampling set have reached the same level of performance as the unit that you actually tested.
Thank you.
Next up is Eric.
Yes, in response to Sean's question regarding the quantity of units that could fall within the residential provisions of the code from this perspective, from this proposal's perspective, it would likely be a very small number within the regulation of single-family duplex townhomes and low-rise R3 and R4 buildings. Townhomes being the most prevalent when it comes to multifamily. In the particular case where the batch sampling methodology could be applied. So just a response to Sean's question for the committee.
Thank you for that. Okay, seeing no more questions, it's now up to the committee to have any more discussion or to make a motion at this point. So feel free to raise your hand if you have anything you want to discuss or if you'd like to make a motion. Jeff, go ahead. Okay, Jeff, you are muted.
Apparently, I don't know how this works. Sorry about that. Somebody mentioned it earlier. We have very similar language in the commercial section for just kind of air tightness testing, where it's testing 20% of units. In that section, the language is a little more clear about, if one fails, you're testing 2 more. Is there any reason we're trying to make it different here? Like, would it be easier and more consistent to adopt that similar language from the commercial portion of the code and kind of apply it here for that sampling?
Okay, good discussion, and that could be up to the committee to make a motion to do that. John, you're up next.
I think I'd like to make a motion dealing with R401.2.2.1. For instance, in an IRC townhome development, say you got a 5-unit building, 3 of those units out of the 5 could all be the same plan type. Would the intent be to just do those 5, or is your intent to do the first 5 of each plan type before you move on to the 1 in 5 scenario? So if the intent is to do one of each 5 plan types, whatever the case may be, I would add some clarification so that it's not just 5 consecutive dwelling units, but 5 dwelling units of the same plan type, or vice versa, or however you want to word it. I'm not a wordsmith, sorry.
How about that? A similar layout, is that, so your motion would be to modify this to add the term of similar layout on those. Is that what I'm hearing, John?
Well, we probably need to add something in there dealing with the fact of that there's multiple plan types in a townhome project. So we just want to make sure we're not excluding, that we're not just saying one plan type, but 5 of each plan type, I guess.
Okay, so again, asking if this is a motion to modify or not, and we're trying, yeah, I'm just trying to push the envelope so we can wrap things up on this. It is how we have it written, consecutive dwelling units of similar plan types are tested. Is that something that you would willing to make a motion to modify?
Yes.
Okay, great. Elizabeth, you're up next.
Yeah, I was actually going to make a motion to just reject this. It does not align with the language for the rest of the Denver Building Code, which does apply to all other R2. And I don't think that this can be reconciled to be consistent with other multifamily testing requirements with the way that it's written.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Right now, that's just commentary to the committee, because we do have a motion already on the floor, but they can take that into consideration.
You bet.
Anybody else? Looks like Chuck is up next.
I'm just wondering if that earlier comment was captured. It's saying 5 consecutive dwelling units of similar plan types, but it's not specifically saying that the different plan types have to be tested, right? I thought that was supposed to be captured also.
Sure. John, did we not capture? Is that what your intent was?
Yeah, I think Chuck is correct in his note.
Okay. Anybody, Chuck or John, any recommendations on where we capture that for this motion?
I mean, I guess it needs to say something along the lines that 5 of each plan type that's being built in a community needs to be tested before you move into the 1 in 5, and then it's 1 in 5. It gets convoluted. The plan that you're supposed to put together for testing is going to be pretty screwy as well. Yeah, because in a townhome project, they're not all the same unit. They're not all the same plan.
Okay, so let me make a suggestion. What if your motion was to modify with the intent to make this section, this highlighted section, match somehow with what you're saying, with the plan type of similar plan types and things like that? Is that okay for your motion?
I think that's fair.
To modify modify with the intent. Motion to modify with the intent to finalize the verbiage on here. Next up is Elizabeth.
Oh, sorry. I think I just forgot to put my hand down. But I can just share what the Denver Building Code currently requires. And I think if I was to vote for this, I would want to see them align. And that says that we need to test the entire envelope area of all stories that have any spaces directly under a roof, the entire envelope area of all stories that have a building entrance, exposed floor, loading dock, or are below grade, and representative above grade sections of the building totaling at least 25% of the wall area, enclosing the remaining conditioned space. So I don't see any alignment between how the proposed amendment is written and how it would apply to the rest of our 2 occupancies.
Okay, thank you. Eric, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It feels like we're spending a lot of time discussing something that is going to have extremely limited application. At best, we would potentially modify this to relate to IRC townhomes And even with that, we've been discussing for the past 15 minutes the many complications that come with it. And I'm not such a huge fan of putting language in code that is very challenging from enforceability perspective, and which will have very, very limited use without additional further revisions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Nathan, your hand's up.
Yes, apologies. I'm going to second this for the intent that we can have a vote to eventually reject, because I agree with everything that's said, and let's just end discussion, have a vote on modification and go from there.
All right, I like your style. So right now there's a motion on the table to modify with the intent to make the verbiage line up with similar type dwelling units throughout that paragraph. All those in favor of that modification, I see some hands up already. Please lower your hands before we vote so we can get an accurate count here. Okay, all hands are lowered. All those in favor of this modification, please raise your hand. Okay, votes are coming in. I see 10. Okay, go ahead and lower your hands. Erica, we're going to need a final count here at some point. All those opposed to this modification, please raise your hand. Okay, I see 6. Go ahead and lower. Okay, all those abstaining, please raise your hand. And I see 5. Okay, Erica, go ahead and lower your hands. Erica, do we have a final count on voting members at this time in attendance?
I think there's been a few people that have dropped off, so it is hard to tell, but we do have 10 for, 6 against, and 5 abstentions. So in total, that is 21 voting members and only 10 for.
Okay, so that means this modification does not pass. I will undo my edits, and there needs to be another motion on the floor or discussion. Nathan, go ahead.
Yeah, based on the existing code, both in what was placed in the 2019 Denver Building Code and what's available in the commercial sections of the 2021 IECC, I motion to reject.
This is Elizabeth. I'll second.
Okay. Right, there's a second. Antonia, okay, all hands are down.
I'm good.
There is a motion. Sure. All hands are down. There's a motion on the table and a second to reject this. All those in favor of rejecting this proposal, please raise your hand. Some going up. All right, final count is 19. Go ahead and lower. Okay, all those, I always have to think about this. All those not in favor of rejecting, it's double negative there, right? Raise your hand. I see 1. Go ahead and lower. And then all those abstaining, please raise your hand. Okay. All right. So rejecting this is passed in terms of rejecting. So this proposal does not pass on that. Thank you for your time on that. We are at the end of our time here tonight. Thank you all for your time commitment. Remember to do your homework for the next committee meeting. We do have quite a few proposals still to get through. Thank you for your time, but please make sure that our time's efficient here. So come prepared, do your homework, read up on those, and we'll see you guys next time. We'll stay on the line if anybody wants to give feedback.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.